Hey everyone, in this video, I'm going to show you how to write an Azure pipeline code that does the following things. Let's say you have an Azure pipeline called Azure Pipeline 1 that produces an artifact, right? It produces in this example, it'll be a data factory artifact, which is just a set of files you can then build and deploy a data factory to, right? Like you could, use parameters and different things in like an Azure environment. But this could be anything. It could be a set of files. It could be, any kind of artifacts that you want to have, that you want to do. And what we want is our pipeline, Azure Pipeline 2. We want to be able to go in and then grab this artifact from this other pipeline, from Azure Pipeline 1, and then go in and then download it. And then we can actually then use it and deploy it to Azure or use our own parameter template to deploy these data factories. And again, this could be anything, any kind of artifact that this could work with. And let's say, for example, we want to do this automatically. So for example, in our Azure Pipeline 1, let's say the first day it ran on January 10th, 2024. And it succeeded here. So what we want to do is we actually want to go and use our pipeline to grab this date, grab the artifact on January 10th, and then download it here, right? And then let's say on the second date, on January 11th, let's say that it failed. It was unsuccessful. What we then want to do with this, again, pipeline is automatically still grab the most recent successful one. So we're not going to grab this one here. We're going to grab this one, right? And then take that and then download it to our pipeline here. And then let's say on January 12th, it actually worked. It succeeded again, right? Then we want to go in and then grab that most recent successful one on January 12th. And then as a bonus tip, I'll actually show you that, let's say for auditing purposes, or you wanted to get an older version, let's say there was like a breaking change to this one, and you wanted to actually grab this particular build of this pipeline run for this artifact, I'll actually show you then how you can still pass in a value and it'll actually grab this one instead, and then go right in here. So again, it'll automatically grab the most recent successful one, but you also have an option to pass in an older build if you want to, and it won't grab any unsuccessful ones. So with that being in mind, let me show you how the code works, and let's get into it. Okay, so let's actually get into the code here. So I have two files called same job download artifact.yaml and different job download artifact.yaml. This is actually because I'm going to show you how to actually download artifacts in two cases. One, if you have a more simple pipeline, you actually can use it in the same job and download it. Or if you have a case where you have to grab the kind of pipeline run ID and download in a completely different job, I'll show you how to pass that variable to another job and use it as well. It's actually really useful for any kind of other job design patterns that you have. So let's get into this. The first thing I did is I named my pipeline download artifact from data factory CI/CD pipeline. And again, this is a predefined variable I've used before in other videos. It just says that when I run the pipeline, it's going to give me the date. This is a predefined variable. It's going to say like today, March 31st, 2024. And I say 0.1 because it's the first run. If I run it again, it'll say 0.2. Then it resets every day, the next day. So I'll go back to 0.1 and so forth. I'm going to use the trigger is actually going to be none. So that's a manual trigger. I mean, we're actually going to manually run this pipeline. And if you see here, I have two parameters. I have a pipeline ID. This is the ID of the pipeline that you want to grab the artifact from. And then the pipeline run ID, that's optional, is what's the build of the pipeline ID that you want to grab. Which run do you want to grab from of that particular pipeline ID? So for example, how do you find the pipeline ID of a pipeline, right? If you see here, the number I have is 1. Now, what does that mean? So if we actually go into my Azure DevOps here, I have 3 pipelines. I have my data factory CI/CD. Think of this as the Azure Pipeline 1 that I showed you in that kind of display earlier. Okay, and if I click on this pipeline, we can actually go up to the top here. And the way to find the ID of a pipeline, if you see here, you see that its definition ID is equal to 1. That means that's the actual pipeline ID is this number 1. Okay, so for example, in this pipeline, if I go up here, this number is 8. So I'd use 8 for this particular pipeline. Now, because we want to grab the artifact from this pipeline, we want to use the number 1. And then if you see here, I have 2 builds that I did. This one is the most recent, but if you see, I purposely failed this to show you that, we don't want to grab this one of the latest one automatically. And then I have this one that's an earlier one, the one that's actually all successful. So this one completely completed. So if we click on this one, to find the build ID, when you click on a build number, you can actually go up to the top and you'll see this number 23. So this is the actual pipeline run ID of this particular pipeline is 23. And if I go to and if you see here, I have the artifact. So this is the artifact that we want to be downloading is an ADF artifact, and then these particular ADF files here, so we can display it however we want to in that other pipeline. Okay. Now if I go back to this one, and I click on this one that failed, again, if you want to pass in one, purposely, what you can do is click on one, right? Let's say even though this failed, I still want to grab this artifact because maybe it's like a newer version that I want to use. And if you see up top here, this build ID is 87. So the one that successfully completed fully is 23. And if you want to pass in one manually to grab a different, ID of a particular one, we can pass in this 87. So remember 23 and 87 for those numbers. Okay. And then if we go back to our code here, right? So we're passing this, and what I say here in this optional is I say if you pass in the number 0, that means that the code below here that I'm going to show you will automatically find the most recent successful run ID of the pipeline. So in this example, if I pass in 0, what it's going to do, it's going to go into this pipeline because this is the pipeline ID 1, and it's going to find the most recent successful completed pipeline, which is this one, right? Which again is build number 23, and it's going to download this artifact. And then we can use that in our other pipeline in the same job pipeline. So I'm downloading an artifact completely from a separate pipeline, Azure Pipeline 1, and I'm going to use it in this pipeline. That's what we're trying to do in this first use case, all right? So what I do here is I have a job called get pipeline run ID download artifact. Now the first step is we check out our source repository code, right? This just downloads all the files needed here so we can use kind of anything that we needed to in this particular repo here. And then I have a PowerShell task. It does this. This pipe just means I'm going to be running multiple lines of the PowerShell script, if you see here. And then you indent here, and then I put an if statement in PowerShell. So an if statement in PowerShell is just this if, and then you put a parentheses here, and then to actually use this pipeline run ID optional parameter right up here to pass it into your pipeline code, you do this $ bracket space parameters dot then the name of the parameter, which is that pipeline run ID optional space bracket. So this is going to replace it in the code when we run this to whatever we pass up here. So in this example, the default is going to be 0. So if this parameter equals 0, close here, right? Then I have this. Then what this says, this curly bracket just says, in this if statement, in this PowerShell if statement, if this is 0, then do what? So what we want to do is I'm actually going to create a string variable called latest successful run ID. And when I'm equal to it is this code right here. And let me break down this code because this is the most important code of the whole pipeline. What this does is this actually uses the Azure CLI DevOps command. And it's this Azure Pipelines build list. Okay, what this is it's this. Okay, so it's this Azure Pipelines. This is part of the Azure DevOps extension of the Azure CLI. This actually allows you to use Azure DevOps APIs and calls in the Azure CLI extension. Right, the first time you run this, it will automatically download, and then you can actually run and use these commands and everything after. Even the first time you run it. And I see this Azure Pipelines build. So what I want to do is I want to get this build list. And what this build list does is this actually is going to return all of the runs of a particular pipeline or multiple pipelines if I want to pass it in. Okay. And if you go in here, you see there's different parameters here you can pass in. You can pass your organization, your project, the result, what the status was of those runs, right? The top. So let me show you what this actually means, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm passing this AZ Pipelines build list, and it's going to return me a list of all the pipeline runs for a particular pipeline that I specify, okay? And the definition ID is the pipeline ID, right? And that's going to be this parameter, right? Again, that $ bracket space parameters, that pipeline ID. That's this one here. That's going to be that one. Again, that was that Data Factory CI/CD pipeline that I want to grab all the runs for that particular pipeline. So I'm saying getting all the runs for this particular pipeline, that Data Factory CI/CD pipeline. This detect just means like detect the organization is true. This little backtick is if you're in PowerShell, it allows you to go into new lines, right? So I can kind of separate my code. Instead of having this all on one line, one long line, I can actually split this up into multiple lines and make it easier to read. And you do that by using this new line backtick here. Now, if you're in Bash, right, I believe it's a backslash here. And then you can use the same thing on new lines instead of a backtick. because I'm using PowerShell, I'm using this backtick. Okay. Then I'm saying this organization is my data engineering with Nick organization. The project that I want to grab it from is this Azure Pipeline Data Factory CI/CD, right? So again, um, that's in my pipelines here, my Data Factory with Nick organization. In my Data Factory Pipeline CI/CD project, right? I want to go and grab these pipelines and then pass in number one, so it'll grab this pipeline. Is all that code is doing there in the beginning, okay? And now what I want to do is I actually want to say result is succeeded. So that means that in this list, right, of that pipeline one of all those lists, I want to grab only, I want to filter for only results that have succeeded. So only pipelines that have that have succeeded, and if the status is completed, because you can have stages where maybe part of the pipeline succeeded, right? Like in our case here, we could say, yeah, this one partially succeeded, but we actually want it fully completed too. That's why I also put the completed is true, right? And we want this particular one here that everything succeeded and everything completed, right? Which is why you put this status completed, okay? And then what I want to do is I want to grab only one pipeline from it. And what I want to do is I want to actually reverse the finish time. So what that means is I want to grab all the successful pipelines that have fully completed for that pipeline ID one, and then I want to grab it by this reverse, and I'm going to sort by, and this little at symbol is the actual, so this returns you an array, right? A list of pipelines. And when I say for each element in the array, right? So for example, it's going to grab these two pipelines, and it's going to say for these pipelines, filter by ones that are fully succeeded and successful. And if there are more than one of these, right? What I want to do then is then filter by the finish time. So whenever the pipeline finished, the most recent pipeline finished. So this was older. I would say grab one that the most recently finished that was all successful, and then pipe it. And what this pipe means is then when this finishes, when this all thing finishes, it's going to give me that pipeline. I'm going to grab the first element in that array because again, I'm only grabbing one of the pipelines, right? The most recent one, and then grab the ID of that pipeline. So what this whole code is going to return me, right? If I pass in this 0, is going to be 23 because again, that's this most recent successful build that fully completed is this 23 here. Okay. Now, one thing you might want to know is if you're writing code to this, how can you kind of debug this locally, right? This is kind of a little bit more complex code, right? So how do I do this without just having to write this and then just try running the pipeline and it failing all the time, right? How do I debug this locally? To debug this locally, let me give you some more space here. You can actually do this. You can actually log in to the Azure DevOps CLI. Again, you have to install the Azure CLI extension, which I will put in the description below as well in this video. We actually run as Azure DevOps login, and then you put in this hyphen organization, and the name of your organization. Remember that Data Engineering with Nick organization. That's going to ask you for a token. Now, to get a token, what you can do is wherever you are in your DevOps, right? You can go up here into this on the top right into this user settings and click on this. Click on personal access tokens. And then in access tokens, you can click on new token and then enter it. If you see I'm using one here that I'm going to delete, soon and stuff, that will give you a string, like a random string, okay? And then what I'm doing is I'm grabbing that string and copying that string here. And then when you're in your Azure CLI, right, I'm clicking here, left clicking, and then I'm pasting it in. And it's not going to show anything, right? It's still hidden. And I hit enter, and I pass that in, right? So I just passed that in, and then it went to this screen. If you didn't pass it in, you'll get this, which is why I'm showing you that. So then I right-clicked and copied that in here, right? And now I'm logged in to my Azure DevOps. So now what I can do is show you what this looks like locally, and you can debug this locally. So I can actually go into Azure Pipeline Builds, right? And I'm going to copy this particular part in here, okay? Azure Pipelines build list, build IDs, and I'm going to pass in 1. That's the pipeline ID that I want, right? Then I'm going to pass in this org. And then same thing, because I'm using PowerShell here, right? I'm in PowerShell. I can use this backtick again, okay? And then I'll pass in the next line here. And then I'm going to paste this in. Oh, I'm sorry. You also make sure you specify a project, right? Just like I have here. So this project, I'm also going to paste in is here. And let me show you what this actually returns. So if I run this, it's going to return a list. Okay, so I go up to the top here. It's going to return a list with this bracket here, right, of all the pipeline runs. Okay, so this data factory CI/CD pipeline, this is the first run, right? The most recent. This is like the most recent one of this particular day, right? And if I go down here, you'll see that it failed, right? The result is failed, right? And see the status is completed because the pipeline completed, but the result was that it failed. Okay. Now if we go to our other one, right, this number 2 on a previous day, right, is our original one that actually fully succeeded. And if you see here again, the data factor CI/CD pipeline is the pipeline that it's using. If you get on here, you'll see that this result succeeded and it also completed. And then you see the times, right, that it finished. Okay, so like this finish time. So that's where there was more than one that fully succeeded. I'm sorting by the finish time and giving the latest one, and then this is the ID at the end that we're grabbing, right? So again, I know this is a little bit complicated. That's why I'm explaining this a little bit more here, right? I'm grabbing the most successful one that completed, give me the first one, and then sort by the finish time descending, so the most recent one, and then grab that element of the array because there's only going to be one because we're only grabbing one pipeline run ID, and then grab the ID. It's going to give you this 23 at the end, which is pretty cool. So yeah, so that's how you can kind of debug stuff, right, to do that, right? So for example, if I were to finish this, okay, if I were to actually finish this and debug this, I'm just going to paste this in here. So if I do just to show you what this actually will output. Okay, I do this query here. What this will actually return me is it will return me 23. Okay. Okay, and that's where I'm going to use to then, that's the pipeline run ID I'm going to use to then download the artifact from that particular pipeline run, right? So pretty neat. Yeah, so that's how that code works there. Now, what if, then I'm just going to print it here, and then what this does, this is actually how you set variables in Azure DevOps. So this write host just means print, but in this particular Azure DevOps case, it's actually going to be setting this variable. So what I'm saying is this $sign, bracket, and I will put the description about where you get this code to, so you can see it, and the description below too. But this is just saying set this, use this task, set a variable called pipeline run ID, right? It's gonna be the name of this variable, and then is output equals true. Okay, that means that we can use this in a different job, which I'll show you in a different case. But in this case, you still want to do this output true, and then we say, and what value do we want to pass in? We want to use this latest successful run ID. And again, that's this one up here. So what I'm doing is I'm packaging up all of this code. So I'm getting that number 23 and then packaging up into this variable called latest successful run ID string as a string. And in Azure DevOps code, right, in the Azure CLI code, right, this $ parentheses allows you to wrap up this whole code, right, in this piece here. So that's why that's Azure CLI specific. Okay, wrap this all up, and then I say, okay, then pass that variable, that number 23 in here, right, as a string, right? Otherwise, if this does not equal 0, what do I do in PowerShell? Otherwise, use the predefined pipeline and run ID that I want to use. So instead of 0, if I passed in that 87 here, right, that means that it will skip this whole if condition here, go to the else clause, and then set that same variable, right, the pipeline run ID that we're going to create a new pipeline run ID variable to this parameter, right, to this one up here. So it's going to be 87 instead if this. So 0 or 87, right, or whatever one I want to pass in. Okay. Now, this environment piece is this Azure DevOps extension PAT. What does this mean? Okay, this is actually how we log in using pipelines to the Azure DevOps extension. Remember before I showed you had to do Azure DevOps login, pass that PAT token? So what we can actually use is there's a predefined variable called system.accessToken. This is actually the pipeline token of your current pipeline. So this same job download artifact pipeline actually has tokens underneath the hood that you can use. And I'm logging in with it using this pipeline, right? We're using this token. So then it logs in this pipeline to be able to call these commands, right? Then I'm displaying the name here as the store pipeline run ID, right, of this particular step here, this PowerShell task. I'm saying this name is going to be store pipeline run ID. So that's going to store either 23 or 87, or again, whatever variable you pass in. Okay. Now I have another task called download pipeline artifact number 2 at 2, second version. So this is saying we're going to download that ADF artifact. And the inputs are going to be a specific build type, specific version run ID, right? It's going to be that same project, right? The pipeline is going to be pipeline 1. And again, that's that number right up here, that pipeline ID 1, right? And then what I'm saying is, and again, you can make this dynamic too if you wanted to. And then the run ID is going to be that specific number that we're passing in right from that if statement. So if you see here, it's going to be that store pipeline run ID. And you put this, to use it in Azure pipelines, you have to use this $ parenthesis, parentheses here, and then the name of the step, okay? And that's this one here. So I name this here. That's going to store 23, and then dot, that pipeline run ID is the variable that we just created. So what it's saying is go into this particular step, and then grab the pipeline run ID variable that I set as whichever one I'm using here, right? And then all we're doing is then download that artifact into this my pipeline folder path. And then here I'm just going to show you what to list it so you can actually show what this looks like when it downloads successfully. Okay, so that's that single job one. So let's actually see what it looks like when you actually do it. So if I go back, right, go to the pipelines here, and I go to the same job download artifact. Okay, now if I go to this first one, now if you want to know what you passed in, is your parameters, you can go to this parent pipeline used and click on this. If you see here, I passed in pipeline ID 1, okay? And then pipeline run ID optional is 0. That means grab me that number 23. That's the latest successful run that fully succeeded in that data factory CI/CD pipeline. So it checks out the core repo. That store pipeline run ID is then dynamically grabbed that number 23, that was the most recent one that succeeded. Then it used that specific build at number 23 to download the artifact to that pipeline folder, right? Then it lists the contents, which is those data factory files, which I can then use in this new pipeline to deploy data factory code, right? Deploy new data factories, whatever you want to do. So pretty cool. Then if you see here in another run, in this one here, if you see, I also, instead of passing in the 0, if you see, I actually passed in 87, right? That was the one that failed of that pipeline run, but that we still want to grab the ID for it, right? We still want to grab that artifact for that particular one. So it's saying the predefined pipeline ID run, because it knows I passed that one in specifically because it wasn't 0, will be 87. Then it uses that specific build, 87, downloads the artifact, right? Maybe this is a newer version of the artifact, right? Then same thing, lists it there. So yeah, that's how a single pipeline works. And again, we'll download that code from this one. So the first run, if I put in 0, it downloaded the artifact from this pipeline run. And then when I put in 87, it downloaded this particular run. And you got the artifact from this stage here. And you can pass in whatever ones you want to. It's complete. So you have more runs. It's completely dynamic, which is pretty cool. And then just to show you here really quickly, I also, because this is in the same job, that's nice. But what if you have a use case where you have more complex code and you can't do it in the same job? It's just going to be too much. And you actually want to download the artifact from a different job later on. So this is the exact same code. I pass in the pipe ID 1, pass in the same run ID optional, but now I split this up into 2 jobs. And here's the main difference. So I have this pipeline run ID to download artifact, okay? Exact same if condition, okay? And I put this is output equals true. That's really important for multiple jobs. In our original example, in the single one, you don't have to put this is output is true, but I like to do that, just to make it consistent. Again, pipeline run ID. But then, so I do the same thing. I store it as this, piece here. And then in this new job, I say in a completely separate job, now download the artifact. So let's say this is the number 23 again, all packaged up. I have this depends block, which means only run this job when this job runs, right? When this job finishes and when it succeeds. So if this job fails, don't run this second job. Okay? So it makes it run it sequentially versus running at the same time. And then what I do is you define this variables block. Then you indent, and then you actually create a variable that you want to create. I created a new one here just to show you the difference here. So it says pipeline run ID to download artifact. And then what's the value of this variable going to be? So you're setting a variable here in this new job called this variable name. And the value is this dependency block. So this is how you pass in variables from multiple jobs, from a different job in Azure Pipelines. Is this $sign and then this bracket, space, and dependencies. Then this get pipeline run ID to download artifact is this first job here. Okay, so we're saying from this first job, get the output of that first job, this bracket, and then in single quotes, make sure there's a single quotes. It's that again, that name of the stage, right? Or the task. This task here, dot, and the variable name that I set that variable with. End single quote, close the bracket, and then space, and then close that last bracket here. That's how you then grab it. So then this variable now is going to be called 23 or 87, whichever one we used. Then same thing, we check out the source code in this job, and then we say run pipeline down the artifact, and then to pass in this variable name now, you use this $sign, parentheses, the name of the variable, that's this one here, and then close. And that's going to be your 27 or 87, whichever one you use. So when we download our pipeline artifact, right, same exact code, except now we use that actual pipeline variable, right, that we mentioned up here, again with that $sign bracket and then close bracket. And we're going to print that out again. So again, not to go over all the steps, but just show you the first one here. This is a different job. You see I have two jobs now. So if you see first, we pass in this one in 0. Okay, it's going to find number 23 again. And it's going to, and the second job then, we pass that number 23 to the second job. Okay, right? Because see, this is still 0, but we're passing in it from this previous job. Okay, we display the pipeline ID as 23. We download it from that specific build. Then we list it, and then it succeeds. All right, so with all that being said, if you want to see what the code is, what it looks like, I have a repo here that I will paste in the description below that will give the exact code you can kind of play around with, use, whatever you want to do. And then I also will paste in all of the stuff that I talked about. So how to get the access token, the Azure CLI, right, what that extra query path was, how to use that, how to get access tokens and log in. So all that will be pasted in the description below. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. Hopefully it makes your life a little bit easier in passing, variables and creating variables and automatically grabbing pipeline code. So thank you for your time.